Hello, hello. Sorry about that. I was just trying to find something that was behind something else on my toolbar on the computer. That's just the way life is, isn't it? I suppose. Anyway, um, oh, hang on. I just need to turn this down. For some reason, my phone is talking to me, and it shouldn't be. Let's just make sure it's all on silent now. Sorry about that. Because my lovely little microphone here, this dear thing, my blue snowball, picks up the faintest little sounds if you're not careful. Hopefully it doesn't do it too much, but anyway, we'll see how it goes. I'm in the middle of sorting out my office, the immediate office, not the background office, because the graphics card on my existing computer is dying. I can only run one monitor at the moment, which is why you will see me turn and look down and away, because I have my replacement computer sitting on the floor with its temporary monitor sitting on top of it, and that one is showing me the extra information that I need. So it's just a little bit weird. Like I'm using two mice, two keyboards. There's stuff everywhere, but I'm also actually sorting out the stuff. I just need to do something on the other monitor, and then we are back with what I was trying to do. And remember to do it on the correct monitor. It's a bit weird, I tell you. It really is. Anyway, hi, I'm Jev. I read old-fashioned children's books. I live in New Zealand, commonly referred to as NZ, which is why in a lot of places it is written ENZED, just because that's the way we say it. Anyway, what else is going on? We're currently reading Rewards and Fairies by Rudyard Kipling, and it is a sequel to Puck of Pook's Hill. And in the stories, both sets of stories, Puck is one of the people of the hills, I think they referred to it. We would call them fairies, but nature creatures. And he is introducing the children, that's Dan and Una, who live in southern England, to various aspects of English history through getting them to meet shadows of characters that existed. Now, some of them were historic figures, and some of them are imaginary figures set in historic time periods. And Mr. Kipling wrote things in a descriptive way so that the children could get an understanding, because it's based on storytelling, so therefore you get a lot more sense of connection with how things were. He's played around a little bit with some aspects of history. So one of the early stories we've had in this book, Rewards and Fairies, was about a chap who was a doctor. He was French and he was a prisoner of war in southern England, a prisoner of war on parole, I think he referred to it as, where they were out living in the countryside rather than actually being in a prison. Now, the character that he talks about in the story is actually an historic figure, but he was not ever in prison in England as a prisoner of war. But Kipling uses the possibility of this having been so to explain something of what the chap was actually famous for, and that's the invention of the stethoscope. And we actually meet a character in the story who has tuberculosis, which is a disease that affects the lungs. And at the time period of the story, that particular sub part of the story was set, it was a fatal thing, but the character didn't actually seem to understand the severity of it. Anyway, so that's just for example. We've had all sorts of things. We've actually had one of our characters end up across in North America, becoming an honorary member of one of the North American Indian tribes, but also seeing at a distance George Washington and all sorts of bits and pieces. So it's all in theory about how helping the children in the main part of our story to learn a little bit of their own English background. And we shall be carrying on with that. So if you're new here, I've already said that, I know, but I'll explain a little bit further. They're not the equivalent of audiobooks because I chat about things, I explain things, maybe when I don't need to, but it doesn't really matter. I will interrupt myself when I'm reading to explain something if I feel that it's probably not clear enough in the story, because often when an author from a different time period writes something, they are writing for people from their time period who actually understood a lot of those ideas that they are speaking of. So one of the things that Kipling did was he was writing for a particular sector of society. He probably thought he was writing for everybody, but he wasn't. So he referred to things and he would use Latin phrases and sometimes French phrases because it was common in his time period for people of his part of society to have learnt Latin and also French. And so therefore he uses them not a lot, but he uses them as a common thing to do in some of his stories. And you can have a good laugh when I attempt the pronunciation and that sort of thing, because I haven't learnt any Latin, I haven't learnt any French, and I'm a Kiwi. I read the way Kiwis generally do. It's just the way it goes. Just before I start reading, the last thing I'll say is make sure you've got something to drink, something to snack on, and somewhere comfortable to sit, because then you can enjoy it. And I'm quite happy with you lurking, and if lurking means that you're studying or working or anything else rather than paying full attention to what I'm doing, I don't mind. That's fine. If I'm keeping your brain entertained for some time, then that's all good. We're about to get started. I just got to check one more thing on my other monitor, and then we'll be off and running. No, not running, but that's just, one of those phrases that people use. One of the ways my reading has been described is it's a little bit like bedtime stories or stories that your weird old auntie tells you, where it's relaxed, it's very much based out of real life, and so therefore there's people are interrupting and things like that. That's us. That's the way we read, and I hope you enjoy it. You're being able to join in with us. So here we go. I shall once again unlock my tablet so I can read to you. I have my books at the moment on this first generation iPad mini. I'm trying to get it so it's not quite so bright for you. First generation because it was given to me as a gift from another family member who was no longer in need of it, but it's now old enough, they've given it to me a while ago, but it's now old enough that it doesn't actually accept any updates whatsoever. And I can't put new apps on it, not that I need to, but it will let me go online to Project Gutenberg and download the ebooks which we use for reading, and it will let me view them on it, which is great. So there we go. We shall carry on by reading the next section. Now, this book doesn't have numbered chapters. It has a slightly unusual arrangement of a section with a title, and then within that section there'll be a poem, and then there'll be a story, which is often named the same as what the section is called, and then another poem to conclude that section. And then we get on to the next one. So often the story between the two poems and the story section is quite long, so we just do one section at a time at the moment. We'll see how we go today. Today's section is called Simple Simon. And if you're watching this on Twitch and you don't like seeing captions, you have the opportunity to be able to control those within your Twitch overlay. There's a CC button, probably on the actual video, and you can turn it off there or change the way it looks. It's up to you. I tried to get it so that I could actually move where it was at my end, but the current setup I can't. Maybe when I get properly onto the other computer and don't end up using my old one as well, maybe then we will. We'll see. Right. Simple Simon. The first poem is The Thousandth Man. Sorry, it's a little bit weird to say. The Thousandth Man. One man in 1,000, Solomon says, will stick more close than a brother, and it's worthwhile seeking him half your days if you find him before the other. 999 depend on what the world sees in you, but the 1,000th man will stand your friend with the whole round world agin you. That means against you. 'Tis neither promise nor prayer nor show will settle the finding for you. 999 of 'em go, but by your looks or your acts or your glory. The other 999 go by outward appearances. But if he finds you and you find him, the rest of the world don't matter, for the 1,000th man will sink or swim with you in any water. You can use his purse with no more shame than he uses yours for his spendings, and laugh and mention it just the same as though there had been no lendings. 999 of 'em call for silver and gold in their dealings, but the 1,000th man, he's worth 'em all, because you can show him your feelings. His wrong's your wrong, and his right's your right, in season or out of season. Stand up and back it in all men's sight, with that for your only reason. In other words, because that's what he believes. 999 can't bide the shame or mocking or laughter, but the 1,000th man will stand by your side to the gallows foot and after. A very loyal friend indeed. Right, and we're on to the story. Oh, and it's a little bit warm here at the moment, so if you see me looking a little bit shiny, I'm sorry. It's summer here. The wind is coming from the side of my office where the main windows would give fresh air, but because it's a bit windy, they're shut at the moment. So it's getting a bit warmer inside. We'll see how we go. Simple Simon, which is our story section. Simple Simon. Catawal came down the steep lane with his 5-horse timber tug. He stopped by the wood lump at the back gate to take off the brakes. His real name was Brabham, but for the first time the children met him years and years ago, he told them he was carting wood. And it sounded so exactly like Catawal that they never called him anything else. I'm guessing it's to do with the way he said it. So I'm just going to read it the way I read it, and you can imagine it for yourself to be pronounced otherwise. Hi, Una shouted from the top of the wood lump where they had been watching the lane. What are you doing? Why weren't we told? They've just sent for me, Catawal answered. There's a middlin' big log sticked up in the dirt at Rabbit Shore, and he flicked his whip back along the line, so they've sent for us all. I'm guessing this is other woodsmen. Dan and Una threw themselves off the wood lump almost under Black Sailor's nose. Black, the colour, Sailor being the horse, I think. Catawal never let them ride the big beam that makes the body of the timber tug, but they hung on behind while their teeth thuttered. Went bump, 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 bump. The wood beyond the brook climbs at once into the woods. The wood road beyond the wood. Let's try that again, just for an example of me proving to you that this is not an audiobook. The wood road beyond the brook climbs at once into the woods, and you see all the horses' backs rising one after another like moving stairs. Catawal strode ahead in his sackcloth woodman's petticoat, that's the smock overgarment, belted at the waist with a leather strap, and when he turned and grinned, his red lips showed under his sackcloth-coloured beard. His cap was sackcloth too, with a flap behind to keep twigs and barks out of his neck. He navigated the tug among pools of heather water that splashed in their faces, and through clumps of young birches that slashed at their legs, and when they hit an old toadstooled stump, they never knew whether it would give way in showers of rotten wood or jar them back again. At the top of Rabbit Shore, 6 men and a team of horses stood round a 40-foot oak log with in a muddy hollow. The ground about was poached and stoached with sliding hoof marks, and a wave of dirt was driven up in front of the butt. That's the big end of the log. I think Kipling's been talking to locals and finding new words for him to do with things, so like poached and stoached with sliding hoof marks. I don't think those are words he's made up. I do just want to check one word for you, and that's the word shaw. S-H-A-W. Yes, we shall do it this way. Okay, it's not a Scottish farming term for the parts of a potato plant that appear above ground. That's not the use of it. Shore, copse or thicket. It's a dialect word. So I have thought in the past that it's to do with a hollow in the ground, but I think that's because each time they've mentioned it, they're actually meaning the small growth of trees in the hollow, like an old quarry or something like that. Sure, a small wood thicket or copse. So there you go. Now we shall carry on with the story when I find the right thing to pull back up. And I shall get my book where it's meant to be so I can see it and read it to you. Sorry, just it's this stuff all over my desk, more than normal, and it's rearranged differently to how it normally is. So it's a little bit weird to be able to actually get to things in the way that I normally would. Right, where did we get to? What did you want to bury her for this way? Said Cattiwow. He took his broad axe and went up the log, tapping it. She's sticked fast, said Bunny Lukenor, who managed the other team. Cattiwow unfastened the 5 wise horses from the tug. They cocked their ears forward, looked and shook themselves. I believe Sailor knows, Dan whispered to Una. He do, said a man behind them. He was dressed in flour sacks like the others, and he leaned on his broad axe. But the children, who knew all the wood gangs, knew he was a stranger. In his size and oily hairiness, he might have been Bunny Lukenor's brother, except that his brown eyes were as soft as a spaniel's. And his rounded black beard, beginning close up under them, reminded Una of the Walrus and the Walrus and the Carpenter. Now, we've had the poem of the Walrus and the Carpenter when we had the Alice books. Do you remember? And if you haven't been with us when we were reading that, then go to my YouTube channel and you can have a listen to the Alice books over there. Alice in Wonderland and Alice's Adventures in Wonderland and Alice Through the Looking Glass. And I shall give you the link for that. There you go. So maybe you want to carry on listening to this story, but that gives you something else that you can do a bit later on. Listening, I think Alice in Wonderland and Millie Molly Mandy are the only 2 sets of books where I have more than one book in a playlist. All the others I've actually, even if there's a series of books, I've actually created a separate playlist for each book. Although I probably need to put links to each of the interconnected playlists for ones where it's a series of books. Anyway, doesn't matter. We shall carry on. So the Walrus and the Carpenter comes from, it's part of British cultural history, the Lewis Carroll books of Alice in Wonderland. And so much so that Rudyard Kipling is now referencing them here. So his beard reminded Una of the Walrus and the Walrus and the Carpenter. Don't he just about know, he said shyly, and shifted from one foot to the other. Yes, what Cattiwow can't get out of the woods must have roots growing to her, Dan had heard old Hobden say a few days before. At that minute, Puck pranced up, picking his way through the pools of black water in the Ling. I'm guessing the Ling is the marshy area that they crossed. I won't bother looking that one up. You can, and then you can put it into the chat box so I can read the definition out for everybody else. Look out, cried Una, jumping forward. He'll see you, Puck. Me and Master Robin are pretty middlin' well acquainted, the man answered with a smile that made them forget all about walruses. This is Simon Chaney's, Puck began and cleared his throat. Shipbuilder of Rye Port, Burgess of the said town, and the only— Oh, look ye, that's a knowing one, said the man. Cattiwow had fastened his team to the thin end of the log and was moving them about with his whip till they stood at right angles to it. heading downhill. So you've got the log like this, there's the thick end, there's the thin end, and he's got the ropes around it, and he's got his horses are going to pull that way, and that's downhill. So I'm guessing that's going to mean that the log goes like that. We'll see. But I get the impression that Catawau knows what he's doing. Heading downhill, then he grunted. The horses took the strain, beginning with Sailor next to the log, like a tug-of-war team, and dropped almost to their knees, pulling hard. The log shifted a nail's breadth in the clinging dirt with the noise of a giant's kiss. "You're getting her," Simon Shaney's slapped his knee. Hang on, lads, or she'll master ye." "Ah!" Sailor's left hind hoof had slipped on a heather tuft. One of the men whipped off his sack apron and spread it down. They saw Sailor feel for it and recover. Still the log hung and the team grunted in despair. "Hi!" shouted Catawau, and brought his dreadful whip twice across Sailor's loins with the crack of a shotgun. The horse almost screamed as he pulled that extra last ounce, which he did not know was in him. The thin end of the log left the dirt and rasped on dry gravel. The butt ground round like a buffalo in his wallow. Quick as an axe cut, Lukenor snapped on his 5 horses, and sliding, trampling, jingling and snorting, they had the whole thing out on the heather. Once you get something really big and heavy moving, you need to keep it moving. And so that's what he did. Mr. Lukenor actually fastened his horses on so that they could keep the log moving. "That's the very first time I knowed you lay into Sailor to hurt him," said Lukenor. "It is," said Catawau, and passed his hand over the 2 wheels. "But I'd ha' laid my own brother open at that pinch. Now we'll twitch her down the hill a piece. She lies just about right, and get her home by the low road. My team'll do it, Bunny. You bring the tug along. Mind out." He spoke to the horses, who tightened the chains. So I'm thinking that mind out is the command to the horses. The great log half rolled over and slowly drew itself out of sight downhill, followed by the wood gang and the timber tug. In half a minute there was nothing to see but the deserted hollow of the torn-up dirt, the birch undergrowth still shaking, and the water draining back into the hoofprints. "Ye heard him?" Simon Shanes asked. He cherished his horse, but he'd ha' laid him open in that pinch." "Not for his own advantage," said Puck quickly. "'Twas only to shift the log." "I reckon every man born a woman has his log to shift in the world, if so be you're hintin' at any o' Frankie's doings. He never hit beyond reason, or without reason," said Simon. "I never said a word against Frankie," Puck retorted with a wink at the children. "And if I did, do it lie in your mouth to contest my say-so, seeing how you—" "Why don't it lie in my mouth, seeing as I was the first which knowed Frankie for all he was?" The burly sack-clad man puffed down at cool little Puck. "Yes, and the first which set out to poison him, Frankie, on the high seas." Simon's angry face changed to a sheepish grin. He waggled his immense hands, but Puck stood off and laughed mirthlessly. We're going to find out what this is about, I'm sure. "But let me tell you, Master Robin," he pleaded. "I've heard the tale. Tell the children here. Look, Dan, look, Una." Puck's straight brown finger levelled like an arrow. There's the only man that ever tried to poison Sir Francis Drake." "Oh, Master Robin, didn't fair. You've the vantage of us all in your upbringin's by hundreds of years. Stands to nature, you know all the tales against every one." He turned his soft eyes so helplessly upon Una that she cried, "Stop ragging him, Puck. Do you know he didn't really?" "I do, but why are you so sure, little maid?" Because he doesn't look like it," said Una stoutly. "I thank you," said Simon to Una. I was always trustable like with children, if you let me alone, you double-handed old handful of mischief." He pretended to heave up his axe on Puck, and then his shyness overtook him fresh. "Where did you know Sir Francis Drake?" said Dan, not relishing being called a child. "At Rye Port, to be sure," said Simon, and seeing Dan's bewilderment, repeated it. "Yes, but look here," said Dan. "Drake, he was a Devon man. The song says so." So Rye is in Kent. Devon is a lot further along the coast. and ruled the Devon seas, Una went on. That's what I was thinking, if you don't mind. Simon Cheyneys seemed to mind very much indeed, for he swallowed in silence while Puck laughed. Hut, he burst out at last. I've heard that tale too. If you listen to them West Country folk, you'll listen to a pack of lies. I believe Frankie was born somewhere out west among the shires, but his father had to run for it when Frankie was a baby, because the neighbours was wishful to kill him, d'ye see. He ran to Chatham. Old Parson Drake did, and Frankie was brought up in a old hulks. Sorry, I've got something flying right in front of my nose, and it's distracting. A little wee bug flying right here. It was. Frankie was brought up in old hulks of a ship moored in the Medway River, same as it might have been the Rother, like the Rotherhithe. The Rother River, and one of the places on the Rother River is Rotherhithe, because a hithe is like a type of dock on the side of a river. Anyway, that's where the names come from. Brought up at sea, you might say, before he could walk on land nigh Chatham in Kent. And ain't Kent back door to Sussex, and don't that make Frankie Sussex? Of course it do, Devon man. Pah! Those West Country boats, they're always fishing in other folks' water. I beg your pardon, said Dan. I'm sorry. No call to be sorry. You've been misled. I met Frankie at Rye Port when my uncle, that was the shipbuilder there, pushed me off his wharf edge onto Frankie's ship. Frankie had put in from Chatham with his rubber spluttered, and a man's arm... Moon's that'd be. Moon was obviously the man. Broken at the tiller. Take this boy aboard and drown him, says my uncle, and I'll mend your rudder piece for love. What did your uncle want you drowned for? Said Una. That was only his fashion of say-so, same as Master Robin. I'd a foolishness in my head that ships could be builded out of iron. Yes, iron ships. I'd made me a little toy one of iron plates beat out thin, and she floated a wonder. But my uncle, being a burgess of Rye and a shipbuilder, he prenticed me to Frankie in the fetching trade to cure this foolishness. What was the fetching trade? Dan interrupted. Fetching poor Flemishes and Dutchmen out of the Low Countries into England. The King of Spain, you see, he was burning 'em in those parts for to make 'em papishes. So Frankie, he fetched 'em away to our parts, and a risky trade it was. So the Spanish king was burning people because they were not Catholic, if they wouldn't convert to being Catholic, to make them papishers, followers of the Pope. That sort of thing has been part of history for a long time, where if you believe one thing and you're in charge, then you tend to either try to get everyone else to be the same as you, or you punish them for it, and often punishment with death. Anyway, we'll carry on with the actual story. So Frankie, he fetched him away to our parts, and a risky trade it was. His master would never touch it while he lived, but he left his ship to Frankie when he died, and Frankie turned her into this fetching trade. Outrageous, cruel, hard work on besom black nights, bolting back and forth off they Dutch roads with shoals on all sides, and having to hark out for the frish, like of a Spanish gallowops's oars creeping up on ye. Frankie 'd have the tiller, and Moon he'd peer forth at the bows, our lantern under his skirts, till the boat we was looking for had blurped up out of the dark, and we lay hold and haul aboard whoever 'twas, man, woman or babe, and round we'd go again with the wind bewling like a kite in our riggins, and they'd drop into the hold and praise God for happy deliverance till they was all sick. Seasick, probably. I had nigh a year of it, and we must have fetched off 100 poor folk, I reckon. Outrageous bold, too. Frankie growed to be. Outrageous, itchy nose. It's probably that bug, or the thought of the bug, irritating me. I don't think it went up my nose. Anyway, we'll carry on. Outrageous cunning he was. Once we was near as nothing nipped by a tall ship off Turgo Sands in a snowstorm. She had the wind of us and spooned straight before it, shooting all bow guns. Frankie fled inshore smack for the beach till he was atop of the first breakers. Then he hove his anchor out, which nigh tore our bows off, but it twitched us round end for end into the wind, d'ye see, and we clawed off them sands like a drunk man rubbing along a tavern bench. When we could see, the Spanisher was laid flat along in the breakers with the snows whitening on his wet belly. He thought he could go where Frankie went. So Frankie, Sir Francis Drake, he later was, recognised as, obviously knew his boat and knew how to move it in difficult waters. You don't usually sail with the wind towards a beach with breakers on it. But obviously he was escaping them and he figured out how to. Anyway, what happened to the crew, said Una. We didn't stop, Simon answered. There was a very little new baby in our hold, and the mother, she wanted to get some dry bed middlin' quick. We runned into Dover and said nothing. Was Sir Francis Drake very much pleased? Heart alive, maid. He'd no head to his name in those days. He was just an outrageous, valiant, crop-haired, tut-mouthed boy, roaring up and down the narrow sea with his beard not yet quilled out. He made a laughing stock of everything all day, and he'd hold our lives in the bite of his arm all the besom black night among they Dutch sands, and we'd a jumped overside to behove him any one time, all of us. So the sands are the shallow areas just off the coast. I'm not sure if you've ever heard of it, but there's a book called The Riddle of the Sands by Erskine, and it's set, I think, in the Second World War or just before the Second World War. It's a novel, and it's about these guys who go on holiday up in the northern coastal area of the Netherlands, and it's near, I think it's the Netherlands, it might be Germany. Anyway, and they discover something among the sands. Now, when they say the sands, they weren't meaning the sandy beaches, but the fact that there's sandbars and sections where it's under the water, where it's very shallow, and then there's other bits where the sand sticks up higher, and then there's areas where it's deep enough. And so it takes someone who knows the area to find their way in amongst all these things. And so this is a reference to similar sort of conditions, but further down the coast of the Netherlands, to the Dutch sands he refers to here. There's a lot of places around the coasts of England that have similar. There's the sandbanks, which people have to be very careful of when they're in boats off the coasts, off certain parts of the coast of England. And they will have, some of them will have a light ship moored to it. It's an old ship that is no longer used for carrying things, but it has a lighthouse on it, and it will have a fog horn or a bell on it as well. It won't necessarily have anybody living on it, but because that particular sandbank is basically is permanent, it stays there because some of them change with the tides and the storms and things like this, but often there are some of them that don't ever move anywhere else. Their overall shape might change a little bit, but because it's always there, they don't want ships to run into it, and so they will have a light ship moored there, fastened to the ground there, so that even though the water is covering everything, people don't run into it because it's too shallow in that area. And so when you hear these bells in the night when you're sailing or on a big ship, you actually know that you're getting a little bit close. You have to get a little bit further away from them. But that's often what they refer to when they're talking about the sands. It is these sandbars or sandbanks in the English Channel and also in the North Sea, parts of the North Sea. Anyway, so we're going to carry on with reading. So he's talked about we'd have jumped overside to behove him any one time, all of us, to assist in any way, I would guess. Then why did you try to poison him? Una asked wickedly, and Simon hung his head like a shy child. Oh, that was when he set me to make a pudding, for because our cook was hurted, I done my uttermost, but she all fetched adrift like in the bag, and the more I biled the bits of her, the less she favoured any fashion of pudding. Moon he chawed and chammed his piece, and Frankie chawed and chammed his'n, and no words to it, he took me by the ear and walked me out over the bow end, and him and a Moon hove the pudding at me on the bowsprit, gub by gub, something cruel hard. Simon rubbed his hairy cheeks. So he had made a pudding because the cook was out of action, and it wasn't very edible, and so they'd thrown it at him. There you go. Next time you bring me anything, says Frankie, you bring me cannon shot and I'll know what I'm getting. It was very hard then. But as for poisoning, he stopped. The children laughed, so Of course you didn't, said Una. Oh, Simon, we do like you. I was always likeable with children. His smile crinkled up through his hair round his eyes. Simple Simon, they used to call me through our yard gates. Did Sir Francis mock you? Dan asked. Ah, no, he was gentle-born. Laugh he did. He was always laughing. Sorry, but not so's to hurt a feather. And I loved een. I loved een before England knew een. Nor or Queen Bess, she broke his heart. But he hadn't really done anything when you knew him, had he? Una insisted. Armadas and those things, I mean. Simon pointed to the scars and scrapes left by Catawal's great log. You tell me that good ship's timber never done nothing against winds and weathers since her upspringing. And I'll confess ye that Frankie never done nothing, that young Frankie never done nothing neither. Nothing? He adventured and suffered and made shift on they Dutch sands as much in any 1 month as ever he had occasion to do, and a half year on the high seas afterwards. And what are his tools? A coaster boat, a little box of walty planking, and some few fathom feeble rope held together and made able by him soul. He drawed our spirits up in our bodies, same as a chimney towel draws a fire. 'Twas in him, and it comed out all times and shapes. In other words, there was something about this man, Frankie, Francis Drake, that drew things out of people to work with him, to give him their effort. I wonder, did he ever imagine what he was going to be? Tell himself stories about it, said Dan with a flush. I expect so. We mostly do, even when we're grown. But being Frankie, he took good care to find out beforehand what his fortune might be. Had I rightly ought to tell him this piece? Simon turned to Puck, who nodded. My mother, she was just a fair woman, but my aunt, her sister, she had gifts by inheritance laid up in her, Simon began. Oh, that'll never do, cried Puck, for the children stared blankly. Do you remember what Robin promised to the widow Whitgift so long as her blood and get lasted? Yes, that there was always to be one of them that could see farther through a millstone than most, said Dan promptly. Well, Simon's aunt's mother, said Puck slowly, married the widow's blind son on the marsh, and Simon's aunt was the one chosen to see farthest through millstones. Do you understand? So having the gift of the sight, being able to see ahead, not everything. Like when you look through a millstone, you can only see the little bit that's visible through the hole, through the hole in the middle of the millstone. And so that's what that references to, I think. So it's just this narrow view of something, but further ahead than anyone else. That's what I was getting at, said Simon, but you're so desperate quick. My aunt, she knew what was coming to people. My uncle being a Burgess of Rye, he counted all such things odious, and my aunt, she couldn't be got to practise her gifts hardly at all because it hurted her head for a week afterwards. But when Frankie heard she had him, he was all for nothing till she foretold on him, till she looked in his hand to tell his fortune, d'ye see? Sorry, just need to check something. One time we was at Rye, she come aboard with my other shirt and some apples, and he fair beazled the life out of her about it. Oh, you'll be twice wed and die childless, she says, and pushes his hand away. That's the woman's part, he says. What'll come to me? To me! And he thrusts it back under her nose. Gold past belief or counting, she says. Let go of me, lad. Sink the gold, he says. What'll I do, mother? He coaxed her like no woman could well withstand. I've seen him within, even when they were seasick. If you will have it, she says at last, you shall have it. You'll do a many things, and eating and drinking with a dead man beyond the world's end will be the least of them. Hang on, sorry, nearly. Eating and drinking with a dead man. Is this Puck? We'll find out. Beyond the world's end will be the least of 'em, for you'll open a road from the east unto the west and back again, and you'll bury your heart with your best friend by that roadside, and the road you open none shall shut so long as you're let lie quiet in your grave. And if I'm not, he says, Why then, she says, Sim's iron ships will be sailing on dry land. Now, had done with this foolishness. Where's Sim's shirt? He couldn't fetch no more out of her, and when we come up from the cabin, he stood amazed like by the tiller, playing with an apple. So Sim is Simon. Remember Simon told us that he had got in trouble for making little iron ships? Wonder what he goes on to invent or initiate something that creates a land-based something made out of iron. Wonder if we find out in this story. My sorrow, says my aunt, d'ye see that? The great world lying in his hand, little and round like an apple. Why, 'tis the one you gived him, I says. To be sure, she says, 'tis just an apple, and she went ashore with her hand to her head. It always hurted her to show her gifts. And here's a picture, and I'm going to find it for you. Let's see if it will show up here. Yes, there you go. I'll move it slightly. Not that one. Come on, that one. Move the picture a little bit so you can see it. So they're on the ship, and there's his aunt, Simon's aunt, looking at the guy's hand, and here's Frankie, Francis Drake, not Sir at this stage, and she's reading his hand and telling him what's going to happen. There you go. They're on the ship. That's on the aft deck by the look of it. Anyway, we shall carry on. Him and me puzzled over that talk plenty. It sticked in his mind, quite extravagant. The very next time we slipped out for some fetching trade, we met Mus Stenning's boat over by Calais Sands, and he warned us that the Spanishers had shut down all their Dutch ports against us English, and their gallowopses were out picking up our boats like flies off hogs' backs. Mus Stenning, he runs for Shoreham, but Frankie held on a piece, knowing that Mus Stenning was jealous of our good trade. Over by Dunkirk, a great gore-bellied Spanisher with a cross on his sails came ramping at us. We left him all they bare seas to conquest, and looks like this road was going to be shut pretty soon, says Frankie, humouring her at the tiller. I'll have to open that door, that other one your aunt foretold of. The Spanishers crowding down on us middling quick, I says. No odds, says Frankie. He'll have the inshore tide against him. Did your aunt say I was to lie quiet in my grave forever? Till my iron ship sailed dry land, I says. That's foolishness, he says. Who cares where Frankie Drake makes a hole in the water now or 20 years from now? I think a hole in the water being died and buried at sea. The Spanisher kept mucking on more and more canvas. I told him so. He's feeling the tide, was all he says. If he was among Turgo's sands with this wind, we'd be picking his bones proper. I'd give my heart to have all their tall ships there some night before a north gale and me to windward. There'd be gold in my hands then. Did your aunt say she saw the world setting in my hands, Sim? Yes, but 'twas an apple, says I, and he laughed like he always did at me. Do you ever feel minded to jump overside and be done with everything? He asks after a while. No, what water comes aboard is too wet as 'tis, I say. The Spanishers going about. I told you, says he, never looking back. He'll give us the Pope's blessing as he swings. Come down off that rail. There's no knowing where stray shots may hit. So I came down off the rail and leaned against it, and the Spanisher, he ruffled round in the wind and his port lids opened all red inside. Now, what'll happen to my road if they don't let me lie quiet in my grave, he says. Does your aunt mean there's two roads to be found and kept open, or what does she mean? I don't like that talk about t'other road. Do you believe in your iron ships, Sim? He knowed I did, so I only nodded, and he nodded back. Anybody but me'd call you a fool, Sim, he says. Lie down, here comes the Pope's blessing. The Spanisher gave us his broadside as he went about. They all fell short except one that smacked smooth, hit the rail behind my back, and I felt most wonderful cold. Be you hit anywhere to signify, he says. Come over to me. Oh, Lord, Mus Drake, I says, my legs won't move, and that was the last I spoke for months. Why, what happened? Said Dan and Una together. The rail had jarred me in here like. Simon reached down behind him clumsily. From my shoulders down, I didn't act no shape. Frankie carried me piggyback to my aunt's house, and I lay bedrid and tongue-tied while she rubbed me day and night, month in and month out. She had faith in rubbing with the hands. Perhaps she put some of her gifts into it too. Last of all, something loosed itself in my poor back, and lo, I was whole restored again, but kitten feeble. Weak as a kitten. Sorry. It's my homemade iced coffee. Just coffee out of the machine and then cold milk. Lots of it. Very nice. Very pleasant. Where's Frankie? I says, thinking I'd been a longish while abed. Down one among the Dons, months ago, says my aunt. Dons being the ruling Spanish people. Like lords, kind of, I think. The term Don in that context seems to only be used of the Spanish. When can I go after him? I says. Your duty's to your town and trade now, says she. Your uncle, he died last Michaelmas, and he've left you and me the yard, so no more iron ships, mind ye. What? I says, and you the only one that be left in 'em? Maybe I do still, she says, but I'm a woman before I'm a Whitgift, and wooden ships is what England needs us to build. I lay it on ye to do so. That's why I've never touched iron since that day, not to build a toy ship of. I've never even drawed a draught of one for my pleasure of evenings. Simon smiled down on them all. Whitgift blood is terrible resolute on the she side, said Puck. Whitgift blood is terrible resolute on the she side, said Puck. Didn't you ever see Sir Francis Drake again? Dan asked. With one thing and another, and my being made a Burgess of Rye, I never clapped eyes on him for the next 20 years. Oh, and the news of his mighty doings the world over. They was the very same bold, cunning shifts and passes he'd worked with before times off they Dutch sands, but naturally folk took more note of him. When Queen Bess made him knight, he sent my aunt a dried orange stuffed with spiceries to smell to. She cried outrageous on it. She blamed herself for her foretellings having set him on his wonderful road, but I reckon he'd have gone that way all withstanding. Curious how close she foretelled it. The world in his hand like an apple, and he burying his best friend, Mas Doughty. Never mind for Mas Doughty, Puck interrupted. Tell us where you met Sir Francis next. So Puck is actually wanting the story to head in a particular direction, the recollections. Sorry, don't forget your water. Normally I just stop for a drink in the chapter breaks, but this one, as I've mentioned at the beginning of the reading, this book tends to have rather long sections, and so you take your opportunities. Right. Never mind for Mas Doughty, Puck interrupted. Tell us where you met Sir Francis next. Oh, ha! That was the year I was made a Burgess of Rye, the same year which King Philip sent his ships to take England without Frankie's leave. The Armada, said Dan contentedly. I was hoping that would come. The Spanish Armada. It's part of history that Dan has obviously been learning about. I knowed Frankie would never let him smell London smoke, but plenty good men in Rye was 2-3 minded about the upshot. 'Twas the noise of the gunfire terrified us. The wind favoured a dow way from off behind the Isle of Wight. It made a mutter like, which growed, and by the end of a week women was shrieking in the streets. Then they come sliddering past Fairlight in a great smoky pack, vambrished with red gunfire, and our ships flying forth and ducking in again. The smoke pats slided down to the French shore, so I knowed Frankie was edging the Spanishes toward they Dutch sands where he was master. I says to my aunt, the smoke's thinning out. I lay Frankie's just about scraping his hold for a last few rounds shot. 'Tis time for me to go. Never in them clothes, she says. Do on the doublet I brought you to be made Burgess in, and don't you shame this day. So I mucked it on, and my chain and my stiff Dutch breeches and all. I be comin' too, she says from her chamber, and forth she come, pavasanding like a peacock, stuff, rough, stomacher and all. She was a notable woman. So if you've seen pictures of Queen Elizabeth I in her finery, that's probably kind of the style, but a lot more ordinary person that his aunt was wearing. So the ruff, that's the big collar that sticks out. What else? I'm not sure what stuff is. Ruff, stomacher. Stomacher is the piece of the garment that comes down the front, covers the stomach, but it's actually a firm piece of garment, and all of it. So it's a whole lot of pieces that go together to make up this outfit. So she was a notable woman. But how did you go? You haven't told us, said Una. In my own ship, but half share was my aunt's. In the Antony of Rye, to be sure, and not empty-handed. I'd been loading her for 3 days with the pick of our yard. We was ballasted on cannon shot of all 3 sizes, and iron rods and straps for his carpenters, and a nice passel of clean 3-inch oak planking, and hide breech ropes for his cannon, and gubs of good oakum. That's the fibre that's used to put between the planks to stop it leaking. And bolts of canvas, that's used for sail making, and all the sound rope in the yard. What else could I ha' done? I knowed he'd need most after a week's such work. I'm a shipbuilder, little maid. So all of the stuff he's talking about is either ammunition or repair materials. We'd a fair slant of wind off Dungeness. I think that's how you say it, Dungeness. And we crept on till it felt light airs and puffed out. The Spanishers was all in a huddle over by Calais, and our ships were strawed about, mending themselves like dogs licking bites. Now and then a Spanisher would fire from a low port, and the ball would troll across the flat swells, but both sides was finished fighting for that tide. The first ship we foreslowed on, her breastworks was crushing in, and men was shoring 'em up. She said nothing. The next was a black pinnace, his pumps clacking middling quick, pumps to pump the water out from inside, and he said nothing. But the third, mending shot holes, he spoke out plenty. I asked him where Master Drake might be, and a shiny-suited man on the poop looked down into us and saw what we carried. Lay alongside you, he says. We'll take that all. 'Tis for Master Drake, I says, keeping away lest his size should lead the wind out of my sails. Hi-ho hither, we're Lord High Admiral of England. Come alongside or we'll hang ye, he says. 'Twas none of my affairs who he was if he wasn't Frankie, and while he talked so hot, I slipped behind a green-painted ship with her topside splintered. We was all in the midst of him then. And so he managed to get away without getting in trouble. Hi-hoy, the green ship says. Come alongside, honest man, and I'll buy your load. I'm Fenner, that fought the 7 Portugals, clean out of shot or bullets. Frankie knows me. Aye, but I don't, I says, and I slacked nothing. He was a masterpiece. Seeing as I was for going on, he hails a Bridport hoy beyond us and shouts, George, oh, George, wing that duck, he's fat. And true as we're all here, that squatty Bridport boat rounds to across our bows, intending to stop us by means of shooting. He was trying to get to where Frankie was, and he had all these ships recognising that he had all sorts of supplies that they needed, saying, oh, give it to us, including one of them who said, Frankie knows me, and the chap who's our main character here says, aye, but I don't, I says, and I slacked nothing. He was a masterpiece. Seeing I was going on, he hailed a Bridport hoy beyond us and shouts, George, oh, George, wing that duck, he's fat. In other words, he's got a lot of load on of useful things. And true as we're all here, that squatty Bridport boat rounds to across our bows, intending to stop us by means of shooting. My aunt looks over our rail. George, she says, you finish with your enemies afore you begin on your friends. Him that was laying the little swivel gun at us sweeps off his hat and calls her Queen Bess, and asks if she was selling liquor to poor dry sailors. My aunt answered him quite a piece. She was a notable woman. So she was basically saying, we're not enemies, why are you shooting at us? Anyway, Then he come up, his long pennant trailing overside, his waistcloths and netting tore all to pieces where the Spanishes had grappled, and his sides black smeared with their gun blasts like candle smoke in a bottle. We hooked on to a lower port and hung. "Oh, Mus Drake," I calls up. He stood on the great anchor cathead, his shirt open to the middle and his face shining like the sun. "Why, Sim," he says, just like that, after 20 years. "Sim," he says, "what brings you?" "Puddin'," I says, not knowing whether to laugh or cry. "You told me to bring cannon shot next time, and I've brought him." He saw we had. He ripped out 1.5 fathoms of brimstone Spanish, and he swung down onto our rail and kissed me before all his fine young captains. His men were swarming out of the lower ports ready to unload us. When he saw how I'd considered all his likely wants, he kissed me again. "Here's a friend that sticketh closer than a brother," he says. "Mistress," he says to my aunt, "all you foretold on me was true. I've opened that road from the east to the west, and I've buried my heart beside it." "I know," she says, "that's why I be come. But ye never foretold this." He points to both they great fleets. "This don't seem to me to make much odds compared to what happens to a man," she says. "Do it." "Certain sure a man forgets to remember when he's proper mucked up with work, Sim," he says to me. "We must shift every living Spanisher round Dunkirk corner onto our Dutch sands before morning. The wind'll come out of the north after this calm, same as it used, and then they're our meat." "Amen," says I. "I've brought you what I could scutchel up of odds and ends. Be you hit anywhere to signify?" "Oh, well, folk'll attend to all that when we've time," he says. He turns to talk to my aunt, while his men flew the stuff out of our hold. I think I saw old Moon amongst them, but we was too busy to more than nod like. Yet the Spanishers were going to prayers with their bells and candles before we'd cleaned out the Antony. 22 ton of useful stuff I'd fetched 'em. "Now, Sim," says my aunt, "no more devouring in Mus Drake's time. He's sending us home in the Bridport Hoy. I want to speak to them young springalds again." "But here's our ship all ready and swept," I says. "Swept and garnished," says Frankie. "I'm going to fill her with devils in the likeness of pitch and sulphur. We must shift the Dons round Dunkirk corner, and if shot can't do it, we'll send down fire ships." "I'll give him my share of the Antony," says my aunt. "What do you reckon to do about yours?" "She offered it," said Frankie, laughing. She wouldn't have it if I'd overheard her," I says, "because I'd have offered my share first." Then I told him how the Antony's sails was best trimmed to drive before the wind, and seeing he was full of occupations, we went across to that Bridport Hoy and left him. But Frankie was gentle born, d'ye see, and that sort never overlook any folks' dues. When the Hoy passed under his stern, he stood bareheaded on the poop, same as if my aunt had been his queen, and his musicianers played Merry Ambry on their silver trumpets quite a long while. Heart alive, little maid, I never mean to make you look so sorrowful. Bunny Lukenor in his sackcloth petticoats burst through the birch scrub, wiping his forehead. "We've got the stick to rights now. She've been a whole hatful of trouble. You come and ride her home, Master Dan and Miss Anna." They found the proud wood gang at the foot of the slope with the log double-chained on the tug. "Catterwell, what are you going to do with it?" said Dan as they straddled the thin part. "She's going down to Rye to make a keel for the Lowestoft fishing boat, I've heard. Hold tight." Catterwell cracked his whip, and the great log dipped and tilted and leaned and dipped again, exactly like a stately ship upon the high seas. And that's the end of the story section of our reading today. So, yes, there's the transition between the story that's being told by the shadow from the past, and then where is the present for the children. Frankie's Trade. Here's today's second poem. "Old Horn to all Atlantic said, a-hey-oh to me, oh. Now where did Frankie learn his trade? For he ran me down with a three-reef mainsail all round the Horn. Atlantic answered, not from me, you'd better ask the cold North Sea, for he ran me down under all plain canvas all round the Horn. The North Sea answered, "He's my man, for he came to me when he began, Frankie Drake in an open coaster all round the sands. I caught him young and I used him sore, so you never shall startle Frankie more without capsizing earth with her waters all round the sands. I did not favour him at all. I made him pull and I made him haul and stand his trick with the common sailors all round the sands. I froze him stiff and I flogged him blind and I kicked him home with his road to find by what he could see of a 3-day snowstorm all round the sands. I learned him his trade o' winter nights twixt Mardyke Fort and Dunkirk lights, on a 5-knot tide with the forts a-firing all round the sands. Before his beard began to shoot, I showed him the length of a Spaniard's foot, and I reckoned he clapped the boot on it later, all round the sands. If there's a risk which you can make that's worse than he was used to take, nigh every week in the way of his business, all round the sands. If there's a trick that you can try which he hasn't met in time gone by, not once or twice but 10 times over, all round the sands. If you can teach him aught that's new, hey, oh, to me, oh, I'll give you Bruges and Newport too, and the 10 tall churches that stand between 'em. Storm along, my gallant captains, all round the Horn." So there you go, and that is the end of today's reading. So the poem basically was the different seas where Francis Drake was famous for sailing, asking each other who had taught him to do all these things that he could do in a boat, and the English Channel or the North Sea, whichever one it was. I'll just find it. The North Sea, there you go. The North Sea said when I began. The North Sea is the one that taught him how to be an excellent sailor, because it threw all the different conditions at him: daytime, nighttime, storms, calms, snow, ice, all these different things. And because he learnt to sail well in the North Seas, he was able to go a lot further and do so many things that the others couldn't. There you go. That's what the meaning for that one is. So, how are you doing? Do you have anything planned for the rest of today? I've got more tidying up to do, more computer tidying up to do, and then things like cooking dinner. What are we going to have for dinner? I'm not sure. I haven't planned that one yet. Have you planned what you're having for dinner? And if it's already the next day, have you planned ahead to what you're going to have? We'll see. You can get back and tell us next time. Been lovely having you here listening. Thank you for coming. Thank you for listening. And we'll see you all again next time we read. Bye.